right, everybody, welcome back to part 3 of our bag of nuts. I have had lunch, I have some iced tea, and we are ready to rock. Let's get this going. And now, the last thing we have to do is we have to add the bag folds and all the highlights and shadows back into the bag, because right now we just have this flat thing kind of like we have there, and it means nothing to your eyeball unless you can get the sense that it physically is a bag, and that's what shadows and highlights do. But here's the rub on this. The little formula we're going to do, not necessarily, it doesn't work on everything. This is kind of experimental and will depend on what your starting elements are, what you're working with. So what we do here may not exactly work on some other things, but the philosophy is sort of the same, so we can go with that. So we got to put these wrinkles and things back on. And basically what we're looking at is did I just close that? What a moron I am. That was dumb. Let me open that back up. Or is it still open? It didn't open it back up. Do I really need it though? Yeah, let's open it back up real quick. And that's why, because I had it on gray. Let's do that. There we go. So highlights and shadows are really kind of everything we're looking at here. So we need to do that. I'm going to close that and go back to our working project that we've been doing on. I hope your drop shadows and whatever else you did are working out fine. If you remember at the beginning of this project, we created a copy of the bag. Remember that when we started this? If it's not at the top layer, make sure you move it up to the top layer. We labeled it bag 2. Close that. I don't want to hear that. Maybe that. All right. So we should have an extra bag up there on top of everything. And I'm actually going to double that layer again. Command J, and we're going to do a bag 3. All right. So let's turn on bag 2 now, and I'm going to actually rename that bag 2 Shadows, HDA-OWS, Shadows. So I'm going to rename bag 2 to Shadows, because that's what we're going to do, and we're going to change that layer blend mode up there to multiply, because that's really what we want to do. And you could sort of see it's actually, before we do that, it is a smart layer, so never mind then. Oh yeah, change it to multiply, and see how that works. We can sort of see it coming through a little bit, but not too much. Now if I change it back to normal for a second, you can kind of see the outlines, the shadowing, the gray here, and that's clearly what we're chasing, is all this gray stuff. So in order for us to really see it, I'm changing it back to multiply, we have to increase those shadows, and we're going to do that through layers. Now since this is a smart object, if we hit Command L to do a layers adjustment, it's going to add it to our list of smart object options. And if you look at this histogram, you can see there's hardly any blacks there at all. It's mostly whites and approaching grays. So in order for this to really start showing up, we need to add black. So I'm going to grab this black slider right there, and I'm going to start sliding it over to the right, and you're going to see it's going to start updating in the image a little bit. And we're sort of bringing back those highlights like that. So all I'm doing is dragging the black slider over till it starts hitting the histogram there, and it's already starting to add some of those shadow lines. It looks pretty good. Let's just go with that. Now watch what happens to your shadows layer over here when you click OK. It adds it as an option now. So it added that shadows adjustment we just did as a re-editable option on that layer. You can go back now. If you double click levels, you can go back and readjust it if you want to. So that's great. You can go back in time and sort of reskin that onion. And that black might be a little dark. Let's see. I did this a few different ways on this one. So what did I put for shadows? I'm going to lower the opacity a bit. Yeah, let's do that. It's a little bit sharp. Maybe, what if I lower my opacity to, say, 85? How's that? Turn it off and on. Yeah, that's not too bad. You sort of get the shadows, but not so much. But enough you can tell what it is. Okay, highlights. We have that other layer we made. We made a copy. Let's call that highlights. Rename it. Highlights. I'm talking too much. My throat is dry. Alrighty. So we got our highlights layer now. Let's turn that on. All right. Shadows are below. And we use multiply here. We could use screen. That might be a bit much. I think what we're going to try to do is use linear dodge add. Okay. And that's a lot. And if you look at my other one I did there, I did linear dodge add. Let's turn all this garbage off here. You know, a little bit. I kept it really low, say to 50% opacity. So let's see what happens if we turn ours down to 50% opacity. It's kind of okay. We're gonna need to do some playing with it though. So let's also level this just a bit. Let me see what happens if we hit a levels on this. And I'm gonna drag the black over again. It's gonna increase that. But what if we start playing with the highlight, the grays a little bit? That's really kind of what we want to deal with. So I drug the black slider over. Let me start over. I drug the black slider over back to the histogram. But since we're working in colored linear dodge, we're getting some different effects. And I'm also going to grab this gray slider and I'm going to slide it to the right just a bit. We are getting some highlights here, but we're also, it's not washing out the way it was earlier. So kind of like that. I'm going to click OK. And now we're getting a little bit more play. It's still a little hot. I think we could probably take some edge off of it. Let's do that. Let's put a mask on this layer, on our highlights layer. Let's go down here and click the mask button, and it's just white now. There's nothing there. So, but we're gonna grab a paintbrush. Just hit B for brush, right? I don't know why I just didn't. There it goes, brush. Soft edge brush, just soft round. That's a fine. And I'm going to turn it down to like 20% opacity up there. Right up there. Turn it down to 20% opacity. And back to our deal. And make sure black is your foreground color. If it's not your foreground color, hit D and it'll make black your foreground color. All right, so back to our deal. So we have a brush that's 20% opacity. It's going to paint in black. And make sure your brackets are around the mask, not the image. It needs to be right there on the mask. Okay? With the 20% brush, and I'm actually going to bracket this brush up a little bit. I'm literally just going to paint in. I'm kind of painting out some of the highlights a little bit. And 20 might not be too much. Let's go 30. Yeah, let's try 30. 30. Oh, my headphone's bothering me. There we go. So I'm actually just kind of painting out along the edge here, maybe on the bottom. So it's not, so the highlight isn't so abrasive. And you know, maybe I'll turn the opacity up a little bit. There we go. 75. Now we get some of the best of both worlds. So maybe I'll take a little bit of out here, maybe some of it out right here. And that's not too bad. Let me show you what my mask looks like. So you can see I'm sort of painting out some of the edges of the bag and taking some of those highlights out, just enough that it's helping but not hurting. So that makes it look a little bit more lively. Do it to taste, but like I said, I'm using a 30% opacity brush, a big soft round brush. Black is my foreground color, and I'm painting on my mask, and that seems to be helping. Also, don't forget we did do a levels on this. That's pretty. That was pretty extreme. All right. So that's kind of a great simple way to do it. You're going to add highlights and you're going to add shadows, and that's really cut and dry. We're going to do that, and we do that mostly with blend modes. All right. Not too bad. Here's what I'm going to do though. I'm going to take those two elements right now on my layers palette and select them both, and I'm going to group those. Okay. Command G. Command G. Yes, that would be great. Can you do that? That'd be great. Command G. Thank you. All right. Here's another thing we're going to do. I want to add, if you look at my bag over here, I have this white stripe that goes down. It's sort of this nice highlight line. Say there's a softbox light over there, and that's going to help round it out just a little bit more. Okay, so let's add that. So right above that whole group right there, right, new layer, and this time make sure white is your foreground color. Hit X until white becomes your foreground color. And that same big brush we just painted on, let's turn it to 100%. All right, B for brush. Make sure it says 100%. All right, and on that new layer we just made over there, I'm gonna pull this out just a bit. I'm going to click once right here, click, and then I'm gonna hold my Shift key and pick a spot down here and do that. Holding the Shift key makes you draw a straight line. So I'll do it again. So click here. I might be a little bit big. Click here, and then hold your Shift key and click down here, and it'll connect the points. And there you go. We have a nice little highlight line. We're probably going to need to turn that down quite well. Before we even do that, let's steal this mask right here. We got to steal a mask because it's going beyond the edges of our bag. So hold down your Alt key, grab one of those masks. They're both the same ones, and drag it up and steal it. There you go. And now let's turn the opacity of this layer down. It's going to need to be low. What did I put it on mine? 26. It seems about close. I might go 30-ish, but my heart's in the right place. 30-ish, somewhere around in there. Okay. Perfect. Believe it or not, we are close to done. The other thing I did over here is let me show you these last two things I did. If I turn it down, you can see kind of it's still a little bit washed out. We can use some adjustment layers to help us out. So I added on this a curves adjustment. Show you right here, a curves adjustment and a vibrance adjustment layer. And I'll show you what they do. The curves kind of brings out the contrast a little bit more and pumps the blacks and whites, and the vibrance kind of brings out the color. It kind of saturates it a little bit more and gives the yellows a little bit more pop. So let's do that on ours. I'm going to hide you. All right, so we're going to add two layers here. We're going to go down to our this half circle here, this guy, and we're going to add a vibrance. It's in the middle, and it'll go right at the very top. And then we are going to add one more. We're going to add curves and put that at the very top. All right, so first things first, and you need to have your Properties tab open for this. Click the Vibrance layer, and it has two adjustments, Vibrance and Saturation. We're going to slide the Vibrance over to the right, and you're going to see these colors start to jump a little bit more. And I'm going to take this all the way up to almost 70. Let's see how 70 works, all right? Just Vibrance, that guy right there, somewhere in that neighborhood. All right, back up to Curves now. We're going to pull the whites, and we're going to push highlights, and we're going to push blacks. So I'm going to grab it right about here, and I'm going to drag the curve down. And you can see the blacks start pumping, and the dark colors get a little hotter. And then I'm going to grab a spot right about here, and I'm going to pull the whites a little bit, and we're going to get a nice deal there. And there you go. That looks pretty cool. If I turn them off, you really see the difference. It starts to, it's pretty washed out there. And then Vibrance pumps in and brings up those yellows. And then Curves really makes that thing come alive. Not too bad. All right, everybody. That's kind of how you do something like this. Like I said, this last bit of formula, it's touch and go. It varies depending on what you're working on. On a can, it may look a little bit different. On a box, it might look a little different. But for the most part, you get the gist of how to do something like this. One last thing I may do, if this was a legitimate bag, that would be a little tiny white highlight line across the top of this bag. So I may go back to our very original bag down here, bag 1, and double click it and click Bevel Emboss. And leave it down to like 1. I mean, you could go you can go depth 100 if you wanted to. That's really not going to happen. But size 1 is probably going to be your best bet as far as overall size. It's just going to add a tiny little white highlight line right there. And even, I mean, if you did two might even be too much. Yeah, two's not too bad. So it adds a little highlight line. It's because of that highlight mode right there. That little highlight mode is what it's looking at. Remember, always turn use global light off. But you can kind of also see it on there. If I turn this up to 20 or 8, you can sort of see where the white highlight is there. All right, but I only need it at about 1 or 2. I'm actually going to increase the highlight a little bit. Maybe take it to 90. And if I turn it off, you can sort of see it kind of does give that body a little bit more volume on it. All right, very subtle, but a nice little effect. All right, everybody, that is how you make your bag of nuts. Give it a shot. Have a good time. Email me if you need help. I'll create a group and enjoy the rest of your week. I will see you guys soon. Have a good one.